My name is Rachel Anderson. I'm 36 years old and I live in Boston, though tonight my mind is back at my parents' dining room table, where a single sentence redrew the map of my life. Before we begin, a gentle invitation. If stories about family, forgiveness, and starting over speak to you, stay a while and consider subscribing. Around here, we believe the hardest words can become the ones that save us. Today's story is called, "They Laughed When I Left with Nothing. I Returned Owning Everything." It didn't start with a fight. It started with a fork, a clatter, and the kind of silence that tells you a storm is already in the room. Thanksgiving at my parents' house in Worcester had the usual markers: roasted turkey, oversweet yams, my mother's cranberry sauce that never set quite right. My brother talked about interest rates as if they were weather. My aunt refolded the napkins after everyone else had placed them in their laps. The house smelled like cinnamon and years. I'd rehearsed what I needed to say on the drive over, whispering to the windshield, pretending it was an ally. Say it simply, say it kindly, I told myself. Then stand still and let the words be true. I had a single suitcase in the trunk of my car, just in case courage lasted longer than dinner. When I stood, the scrape of my chair felt too loud. Faces lifted. My father's flat as a closed book. My mother's alert and careful, the way you watch a candle near a curtain. "I'm leaving," I said. "Not tonight, but soon. I'm going to build the life I should have built 10 years ago." No one moved. I can't stay in the job I never wanted, and I can't stay in a house, our house, this family, pretending I'm someone I'm not. I'm starting my design studio. I know it sounds foolish, but I need to try while I still recognize myself. There are different kinds of laughter, the kind that invites you in, the kind that keeps you out, and the kind that turns a table into a witness. My cousin smirked first, a small, sideways thing. My uncle's chuckle was bigger, the kind he used when the Patriots were losing and he wanted to pretend it didn't matter. Someone muttered, "At 36." And someone else said, "Midlife crisis," as if I weren't in the room. My father didn't laugh. He set down his fork and fixed his eyes on me like a level on a wall. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady, the way hammers are steady, "you will never be more than a burden if you keep chasing smoke." I felt the air leave my chest, a breath stolen, a childhood emptied. My mother reached for her wine glass and didn't look at me. I watched her thumb circle the stem and thought of all the times she'd used silence to spare us, then realized silence sometimes spares no one. "I'm not asking you to believe in it," I said. "I'm asking you to believe in me." My father shook his head once. "You walk out with nothing, you'll crawl back with less. There are words you can dodge and words that hit you clean. This one found my ribs. I didn't yell. Age teaches you that loud isn't the same as strong. I pressed the napkin flat with both hands like smoothing a wrinkled map, and I nodded. It was a nod that said I'd heard him and also that I had already decided. I took my coat from the back of the chair, found my keys in the pocket, and looked at the people I was born to. When families fracture, it is rarely theatrical. It is 1,000 tiny choices, then a final, visible one. At the door, my mother finally spoke. "You have health insurance," she said softly, as if it were a prayer. "I'll figure it out," I said. "I've figured out everything else." On the porch, the November air met me like a cold cloth to a fever. The street was quiet, save for a dog somewhere complaining about the moon. I walked to my car with a suitcase lightness that didn't match the weight in my chest. When I opened the trunk and saw the small, neat rectangle of my life, I almost laughed too at the audacity of trying. I slid into the driver's seat and stared at the glow of the dashboard. My hands were shaking. I wasn't brave, I was simply done. There's a difference. Brave is a flag you wave. Done is a ground you stand on. Inside the house, someone started talking again, the way people do when the moment has passed and they want the room to return to itself. But rooms remember, so do daughters. I turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught, a small machine refusing to quit. I pulled away from the curb and watched the only home I had ever known shrink in the rearview mirror until it became a square of light and then nothing at all. They say you shouldn't drive when you're crying. They're right. The road blurred and steadied, and somewhere on Route 9 I told myself the oldest promise I knew, 1 mile at a time. I didn't have a plan as much as a direction. South toward Boston. East toward the life I'd stopped postponing. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the window, tired eyes, a jaw set like a locked door. I looked older than 36 and younger than the girl who'd learned to make herself smaller to fit a table. I touched the steering wheel as if it were a railing on a high staircase. "They laughed," I whispered, testing the words. "They laughed when I left with nothing." A truck rumbled past, lights like impatient stars. The light turned green. I eased forward. Here's a thing no one tells you about starting over. It sounds like an empty car on a quiet road. It smells like old coffee and winter. It feels less like flight and more like choosing to keep your feet on the pedals when everything in you wants to park and go back. Back there, I'd been a good employee, a good daughter, a dependable guest at a dependable table. Out here, I was a beginner. Beginners look foolish until they don't. They fail until it matters that they tried. Somewhere near the city line, the radio caught a song from the year I left for college. I sang along off-key because there is a kind of courage in being terrible at something and doing it anyway. I laughed, not at myself, but with myself, the way you laugh when a tight knot finally loosens. By the time I reached my apartment, a month-to-month sublet with thin walls and a view of a brick alley, the night had settled into itself. I carried the suitcase up 2 flights, each step announcing me to the strangers behind their doors. Inside, the place was bare enough to echo. I set the suitcase on the floor and opened it. 2 sweaters, 1 pair of jeans, a folder with sketches and lists, a notebook whose first page was still blank. I sat on the edge of the mattress and held a pen above that empty page. My hand hovered there, shaking a little. Then the line came, simple as breath. I am not leaving love. I am leaving permission. The pen steadied. The page accepted me. Outside, the city hummed its low, indifferent lullaby. I lay back, eyes on the cracked ceiling, and felt the ache under my ribs give way to a quieter thing, space. Empty isn't the same as nothing. Sometimes it's the room you need to build. Morning came thin and gray, the kind of Boston light that makes everything look honest. The radiator in the sublet clicked like a nervous metronome. I boiled water in a dented kettle and poured it over a tea bag I'd already used twice. The steam rose, tried its best, and disappeared. I made a list because lists pretend to be ladders. 1. Find work, anything steady. 2. Cut expenses, everything not essential. 3. Leave the rest, fear, permission, old voices. By noon, I had a job application open for a coffee shop on Tremont. The manager, a woman with a Red Sox cap and a voice that sounded like she'd taught herself to survive, asked if I could start that afternoon. I said yes before she finished the question. Sometimes dignity is a later purchase. The apron was too big, the pace too fast, the register too smart for the first hour of my new life. I learned the rhythm the way you learn a new language, by getting it wrong and listening harder. Milk hissed, shots pulled, names were spelled 3 different ways and none of them right. A man in a suit complained his Americano tasted like a meeting he didn't want to attend. I smiled and remade it. You pick your battles, that one wasn't mine. During my break, I took out the folder from my suitcase. The one with sketches, ideas, bits of a studio I could only see if I squinted. I traced a line with my finger, the way you might touch a scar. A college kid saw the papers and said, "Cool, the way only the young can make a single word feel like a hand on your back." That night I ate peanut butter from the jar and scrolled through postings on a cracked phone. Freelance designer needed. Must have experience. The word was a locked door. I bookmarked it anyway. Hope looks ridiculous until it starts paying rent. Sleep didn't come. The walls were thin enough to inherit other people's lives, a couple laughing, a baby fussing, a television whispering a courtroom show. I lay there and thought of my mother's thumb circling a wine glass. I thought of my father's sentence, how neatly it split me in two. I reached for the notebook on the floor and wrote, in small letters, I can be broke without being broken. The words didn't fix anything. They just made the room feel a shade larger. Days took shape, the way rivers do, by wearing down stone. I opened the cafe at 6, learned who asked for extra hot, who tipped in quarters, who wanted kindness stirred into the cup. The pay was minimum and the pride was rationed, but the steadiness kept the lights on and the fear quiet. After my shift, I walked the city like it had answers written on its brick. Boston is good at pretending you belong if you walk like you know where you're going. On Sundays, I took the green line to the library and sat near the tall windows. I watched tutorials with the volume low and the captions on. Fonts, color theory, layout, words I used to say in secret, now spoken right into the air. I took notes like a student who understands tuition is not always money. Sometimes it is patience. The first client found me by accident. A flyer on the cafe corkboard asked for someone to design a simple logo for a neighborhood bakery. Cash only, quick turnaround. I took a photo of the number and called from the alley behind the shop, where the dumpsters sweetened the air with old muffins. The owner's name was Lena. Her voice carried sugar and steel. "Make it clean," she said. "Make it ours." I worked 3 nights on a laptop that wheezed when I opened too many tabs. I sent her 6 options because bravery needs company. She picked the simplest one, and when she handed me $50 in small bills, I felt a weight in my pocket I hadn't felt since I was a girl saving for a bicycle. Money is only part of what it buys. I taped a copy of the logo above the mattress, a proof of life. When the ceiling cracked a little more, I didn't mind. Houses age, so do stories. Some evenings I walked past brownstones with curtains that glowed like warm promises. I let myself imagine the inside, hallway photos, a dog asleep on a rug, the smell of something baking that wasn't the past. I wasn't jealous. Longing is different than envy. Longing is a map. Not everything improved. The coffee shop cut my hours 1 week and I counted coins at the counter, cheeks hot with the math of it. The bus was late and the cold found the holes in my gloves. A friend texted a photo from a reunion I couldn't afford to attend. Everyone looked younger, or maybe just softer. I put the phone face down and breathed until the sting blurred into something I could hold. But something else was happening, quietly like a plant that insists. A regular at the cafe, navy blazer, shoes that never saw rain, noticed me sketching during my break. "You do that?" she asked, pointing. I nodded, suddenly defensive of the fragile thing on the page. "Good eye," she said and handed me a card. "We're a small firm. We hire freelancers sometimes. Email me a few samples." That night I spread my drawings on the floor, knees pressed into the cheap carpet until they ached. I edited like a person packing for a journey with only 1 bag. I sent 5 files and a sentence that made my hand shake. "Thank you for the chance." Days passed. Laundry, shifts, the library, the list. Then an email arrived with a subject line that made my breath hiccup. "Loved your work, can we talk?" I read it 3 times as if belief required repetition. We scheduled a call. I stood by the window because the light felt like witness. Her voice on the phone was brisk and kind. "A small campaign," she said. 2 weeks, nothing glamorous, but paid. After we hung up, I laughed alone in that narrow room, a sound round enough to bounce, not because I had made it, not even close, but because the road I'd chosen had finally answered me back. In the morning, I folded the café apron with respect and tucked the business card into my wallet like a palm-sized promise. On the commute, the city looked less like a test and more like a place you could learn. A man on the train fell asleep against the window. His breath fogged a circle that cleared and fogged again. I watched it and thought, this is all it is. In and out, begin and begin again. At closing, the manager asked if I could take another shift next week. I told her I'd try, that I was taking on some design work. She flashed the small grin of a woman who recognizes a future when it walks in wearing second-hand boots. "Don't let the fancy people push you around," she said. "Charge for revisions." On my way home, I passed the bakery. Lena had taped the new logo to the glass door, my lines, her name. A little boy pressed his fingers against the pane and smeared it with sugar. I stood there longer than I needed to, the way you stand at graves or beginnings. Back in the apartment, I opened the notebook to a fresh page. The radiator clicked, the room held still, and the pen moved like it finally trusted me. I wrote, "They laughed when I left with nothing." Then below it, smaller, a private truth I wasn't ready to say out loud. But I am learning how to build with air, and air can hold more than people think. The campaign brief arrived as a clean PDF, bullet points, deliverables, a deadline that looked closer the more I stared at it. I printed it at the library and folded it into thirds like a letter to my future. Back in the apartment, I cleared the floor as if clearing a runway. I brewed coffee that tasted like courage and lined up pencils the way surgeons line up instruments. Imposter syndrome announced itself like an old acquaintance, overly familiar, a little smug. "Who do you think you are?" I answered it with work. Sketch, erase, adjust. Font families like branching trees. Color swatches that reminded me of October in New England when the maples decide restraint is overrated. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I hadn't saved, though I knew it by heart. "Mom, are you safe?" I stared at the 2 words until they felt like 4. I typed and erased twice, then wrote, "Yes, working late." I didn't tell her about the radiator's stubborn clatter or the draft that found my ankles. I didn't tell her about the gig or the way my chest had lifted when the email arrived. I sent a second message before I could overthink it. "Thank you for asking." Her reply came 10 minutes later, punctuationless, like a whisper, "Eat something." I set the phone face down and ate crackers over the sink. There are love languages and there are survival dialects. My mother's love rarely wore poetry. It wore reminders and casseroles. It wore silence when the room needed peace more than truth. The next morning, I took the green line to the firm's office, a 3rd-floor walk-up above a florist that smelled like second chances. The conference room had glass walls and a fern that was braver than any plant had a right to be. 3 people sat across from me. Navy blazer woman from the café, a copywriter with a smile like a dash, and a project manager whose pen tapped in metronome time. They asked about my process. I said listening first, then looking, then making. It sounded simple because it was. We weren't building a cathedral. We were trying to persuade humans to feel something and do something in that order. When I laid out the initial concepts, the room went quiet. I braced for the laughter I remembered from another table. Instead, the copywriter leaned forward and said, This one has a heartbeat." The project manager's pen stopped tapping. Navy blazer nodded once, the kind of nod that adds a floor to the building you're standing in. They gave notes, good ones. "Fewer curves here, more air there." "Let it breathe," someone said, and I thought of my notebook, of the sentence I'd written in the dark. I took the notes home and taped them to the wall. Critique is a gift if you open it slowly. At the cafe, the regulars noticed something different. Maybe it was the way my shoulders lifted less. Maybe it was nothing visible at all. The manager slid me an extra muffin and didn't mention it. Lena from the bakery stopped by and handed me a bag of rolls. "Creative people forget to eat," she scolded, and I loved her for pretending I had always been one. On the fourth night of the project, I hit a wall. The kind you can't climb with caffeine or grit. Every version looked like a cousin of the last, an echo arguing with itself. I closed the laptop and stood by the window. The alley glistened from a light rain. Across the way, a woman in a bathrobe watered a plant with sincere attention. It struck me then, some things thrive because someone believes they should. I thought about my father, a man who believed in shelter more than wonder, in checks that cleared and cars that started. He'd grown up with snow inside the house, with a mother who counted change before counting on anyone. He'd equated risk with harm so long that he no longer separated them. He wanted me safe because safe had saved him. But love and fear can wear the same coat if you don't look closely. I sat back down and wrote on a sticky note, it wasn't poverty that suffocated me. It was living a life that didn't belong to me. I read it aloud, testing the shape of the truth. It fit. I stripped the design to its bones, fewer shadows, cleaner lines, a color that felt like morning after a long night. When I sent the file, I included a line I'd never allowed myself to type before. "This is the version I believe in." The response came in 5 minutes flat. "Yes, this." 3 exclamation points that felt extravagant and exactly right. Small money followed, enough to pay 2 bills on time and buy groceries without consulting a calculator. I called the utility company and heard my own voice sound like someone competent. On my way back from the market, the bag tore and an orange rolled into the street. I chased it, laughing at myself, and a stranger caught it with the reflexes of a shortstop. "You got it," he said, and I wanted to tell him not just the orange. At night, the apartment took on that particular quiet of city buildings, everyone close, no one touching. I opened old boxes in my head and sorted what belonged to me from what didn't. Shame went in the trash. So did the costume jewelry of other people's opinions. I kept the stubbornness, the curiosity, the part of me that sat through discomfort without calling it defeat. A week later, another email. A different client. "Saw your work on a colleague's laptop," it read. "Are you available?" Availability is a complicated word when you're still pouring coffee at dawn. But I wrote back yes because momentum is shy and doesn't like to be kept waiting. I bought a second-hand desk from a moving sale and dragged it up the stairs one riser at a time. The man who sold it to me said, "It's sturdier than it looks." And I thought, so am I. I set it beneath the window where the light was kindest and placed the fern I'd bought from the florist downstairs. It drooped for 3 days, then decided to live. Sometimes, late, I'd hear my neighbor practicing the piano, hesitant scales that broke into a fragment of something beautiful, then retreated. I liked him for not being good yet. It gave me permission to keep going when the lines on my screen looked like a language I hadn't fully learned. One afternoon, I took the train out to Worcester with a package I'd been putting off. My mother opened the door with that careful hope she wears when she doesn't know which version of the world is about to walk in. I handed her a small framed print, the bakery logo, the first thing someone had paid me for. She held it like it was fragile and holy. "I wanted you to have the first," I said. She brushed the glass with a thumb the way she used to brush hair from my face. "It's clean," she said, searching for a word, landing on one she trusted. "It looks like it knows what it's doing." We stood in the doorway with the weather trying to choose a season around us. From the kitchen, I heard the tick of the clock that had measured every Christmas morning of my childhood. "Your father's at the hardware store," she said. "He'd like to see you." A statement disguised as an invitation, disguised as a plea. "I will," I said. "Not today, soon." We both understood the code. Back in Boston, I worked through the weekend. The firm asked for another round, then another. I charged for revisions like the manager told me to. I slept less, worried more, learned to stretch time and attention until they thinned but didn't tear. In the mirror, I recognized a woman who looked like me and also didn't, a version with edges and intention. On Monday, I walked to the café for my shift and paused outside. Through the glass, I could see my reflection layered over the inside, the espresso machine, the tip jar, the bulletin board with torn corners. I stood there long enough that a customer opened the door and said, "You going in?" I nodded and stepped aside to let him pass. At the counter, the manager tossed me the apron and raised an eyebrow at the circles under my eyes. "Building something?" she asked. "Yes," I said, tying the strings behind my back. "I think I finally am." Later, on break, I opened the notebook. The radiator clicked. The fern made its quiet green argument for persistence, and I wrote without looking up. "It's not being broke that kills you, it's being broken. I am mending in public. If you see me, clap once quietly so I know I'm not alone." The projects kept coming, each one a little bigger, a little bolder. My inbox, once empty as a desert, now carried small ripples of possibility. Flyers, social media graphics, a brochure for a nonprofit that wanted to look kinder than its budget. The money wasn't steady, but it was there. And with every invoice I sent, with every thank you reply, the voice inside me, the one that used to whisper "go back, it's safer there," grew quieter. But success has a way of pulling the past into the present. One night, as I was closing my laptop, I received a message from an old coworker at the insurance firm I'd abandoned. He wrote, "Heard you're freelancing now. Brave. I could never risk that. I read the word brave 3 times. It didn't feel like me. Brave was a soldier, a firefighter, a mother carrying her child through a storm. I wasn't brave. I was simply someone too tired of breaking in silence." Still, the word lingered. Brave. That week, the firm that had given me my first campaign asked me to join a meeting in their office downtown. I wore the only blazer I owned, thrift store navy, sleeves just a little too short, and walked through glass doors that reflected a woman I didn't quite recognize. They introduced me to the client, a tech startup with wide eyes and wider dreams. I laid out my concepts, lines and colors that felt like me written in another language. For a moment, no one spoke. And then the client, a young man with hair that fell into his eyes, said, "This looks like the future we're trying to build." Those words lit something in me, but also unearthed something older. I remembered my father at our kitchen table when I was a girl, his calloused hands wrapped around a mug, telling me the world didn't need dreamers. "Dreams don't pay the bills," he'd say, his voice steady, as though he were reading from scripture. And I'd nod, a child practicing agreement while doodling in the margins of my homework. Now, years later, sitting in a conference room with strangers who wanted what I created, I realized how heavy his words had been, how I'd carried them like stones in my pocket. But stones can weigh you down, or they can build your foundation. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the meeting, the nods, the approval. Yet, alongside the pride, there was anger. Anger at the years I'd lost bending myself into shapes that never fit. Anger at the laughter that had chased me out of my parents' home. I wanted to tell my father he had been wrong, that dreams could, in fact, pay the bills, if only you were stubborn enough to keep the light on when the world wanted it out. Instead, I did the only thing that steadied me. I worked. I opened my notebook and sketched until dawn, until my hands ached and my eyes blurred. When the sun rose, pale and forgiving, I looked at the page and saw something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just a design. It was my voice, shaky, imperfect, but mine. I taped the sketch to the wall beside the bakery logo, the first $50 proof of belief. And for the first time, I whispered into the empty room, not as a plea but as a promise. I will not crawl back, not now, not ever. Momentum is generous until it isn't. For a few weeks, the work braided itself neatly. Café at dawn, designs by night, a rhythm that felt earned. Then the deadlines began to overlap like storm clouds. 3 clients wanted everything by Friday. The firm needed a rush revision by Oud. Lena asked if I could redo a chalkboard menu in time for a Sunday festival. I said yes to all of it, as if endurance were the same thing as worth. Sleep thinned. Meals became whatever I could eat with one hand while the other dragged a cursor. The fern drooped in protest. I forgot to water it and apologized out loud when I finally did. The radiator clicked its old metronome, and I tapped the same tempo on the desk with a pencil, trying to trick my pulse into calm. On Wednesday afternoon, my manager at the cafe pulled me aside. "You're here and not here," she said. "Customers can tell." I started to defend myself, but she lifted a palm. "I'm not firing you. I'm reminding you. You don't have to impress anyone with how much you can carry." She reached under the counter and placed a granola bar in my hand like a benediction. "Eat, designer." I laughed, which startled me. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm learning how to be 2 people." "Try being one person who does 2 things," she said. "It's kinder." That night, the power flickered once, twice, and then the apartment fell into a dark, so complete it felt like a curtain had been yanked across my life. Somewhere down the hall, a child squealed, then giggled. I found my phone by the glow of its dying battery and turned on the flashlight. On the floor, my sketches turned into islands, lit and isolated. I sat with my back against the bed and waited for the lights to return, telling myself that a pause was not a peril. In the dark, my father's sentence rose up again, the one shaped like a verdict. It brought with it a memory I'd avoided. Me at 22, showing him a portfolio before a job interview, hoping he'd say you're good. He'd thumbed the pages, nodded toward a crooked line, and said, "People pay for perfection, not almost." He had meant to help. We both knew how it landed. When the power returned with a sigh, I reopened the laptop and saw the design I'd been forcing. I deleted it, and the next, a small grief, a small relief. I started over with a simpler idea, something the copywriter had said playing in my head. Let it breathe. I took away everything that wasn't message, left only what felt inevitable. When I finally hit send, the clock read 3:12 a.m. The quiet had changed from pressure to presence. The reply came before noon. Perfect. Keep going. The 2 words loosened something between my shoulders. I washed my face at the sink and caught my reflection, eyes rimmed in red, yes, but steadier. There is a pride that comes from surviving. There is a different pride that comes from choosing not to drown in your own drive. Late that afternoon, my phone rang. Dad. The name looked unfamiliar on the screen, not because I didn't know it, but because it rarely appeared without my mother's. I let it ring twice more, cowardice or caution, I couldn't tell, then answered. "Hi," I said, a long exhale. "Rachel." His voice was roughened by distance. I could hear the clink of tools in the background. He must have been in the garage. "Your mother said you came by." Not a question. Then, because we were both amateurs at this, he added, "Good. I left something for her." The silence stretched like taffy. "How are you?" "Fine." A beat. "I heard you're busy." The word was flat but not unkind. "I am," I said, "in a good way." Another clink. "You still have health insurance?" I almost laughed, then didn't. "I'm working on it." HM. The pause again, his mind inventorying shelves, sorting screws, translating love into logistics. "Your uncle says you're doing designs for businesses." "I am." A longer pause, the kind that angles toward a decision. "They paying you on time?" he asked. "Mostly." I smiled despite myself. "I charge for revisions." Good. It was the cleanest good I'd ever heard from him, no lecture writing behind it. Then quieter. "It's nice to hear your voice." The words seemed to surprise him as they arrived. "Come by Sunday. If you can, no dinner, just coffee." "I'll try," I said. We both knew the code. Then the line clicked empty in that old, familiar way. After I hung up, I felt both heavier and lighter, like a bridge had lowered but the gap remained. I returned to my desk and let the feelings sit where they were, like guests who didn't need entertaining. Work pressed in again. The startup's campaign entered a phase that felt like juggling knives. Stakeholders with opinions, last-minute pivots, a request to make it pop that meant everything and nothing. I wrote a firm, polite email laying out timelines and scope, and for the first time in my life, I hit send without asking anyone if it sounded okay. Boundaries are also design, white space you defend so meaning can exist. Friday, I took the morning off from the café so I could deliver files in person. On the walkover, Boston wore its best October, blue sky as crisp as an apple, leaves practicing their last dance. At a crosswalk, a girl about 8 tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed at a poster I'd designed for a school fundraiser. "I like that one," she said. "It's happy." The mother glanced down at her and smiled. I kept walking, my throat tight, a private ceremony taking place behind my ribs. The meeting went well. We shook hands, discussed next steps, agreed on a rate that made me want to sit down. When I left, I rode the elevator with a man who looked like a tired saint and a woman holding a bouquet in her lap as if it might fly away. No one spoke. It felt sacred anyway. Back at the cafe the next day, a line reached the door. It was the kind of rush that turns time liquid. I worked the bar while the manager worked the register, our hands a practiced conversation. When the line finally thinned, she leaned in and said, "When are you going to give your notice?" The question startled me. "Why would I?" She waved a hand. "Not today, not this minute, but you can see it from here, can't you?" I wanted to say no to hide from the hope of it. Instead, I told the truth. "Maybe." "Good," she said. "I like having you here. I will like you leaving more." That evening, I took the train to Worcester for the promised coffee. My mother had set the table as if habit were a kind of faith, 4 cups, even though it was just us. My father came in carrying a box of screws like they were treasure. He looked at me, looked away, then looked again as if his eyes needed to learn me anew. We sat. We tried small talk, weather, sports, traffic on 290. Then, unprompted, he said, "I shouldn't have said what I said." He didn't look up when he said it. At dinner, that night, the apology was a short staircase. I took it. "Thank you," I said. My chest ached in an old, dull place and also softened. "I know you meant to protect me." He nodded. "Protection and permission," he said, surprising me. I didn't know the difference. He lifted his coffee. "I'm learning." After, in the car, I sat with my hands on the wheel and let the tears come without drama, the quiet kind that heal as they fall. The road home was familiar and new at once. Sunday night. Back in the apartment, I rearranged the wall. The bakery logo, the first campaign printout, the sticky note with my truth, a new invoice paid in full. I added a calendar block that read 2 weeks' notice, with a question mark that would not be a question for long. Before bed, I watered the fern. It didn't thank me, but it lifted its fronds as if to say, "Noted." I opened the notebook and wrote, "Work that belongs to me is heavier and easier at the same time. I am tired like a field, not like a wound." I set the calendar alert for a Tuesday. 2 weeks' notice, noon, say it plainly. Until then, I worked like a person moving apartments inside her own life, packing some things, letting others go. The firm sent a new brief, bigger than the last, regional rollout, multiple touch points, the kind of project that made my hands go cold and my spine sit up taller. We met in a room that smelled faintly of printer ink and eucalyptus. The account lead said, "You'll be our point on visual. We'll build around you." The words landed somewhere between flattery and assignment. I nodded and wrote "build around / don't collapse" in the margin of my notebook. At the cafe, I practiced the sentence. "I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice." The mirror absorbed it. The subway car jolted under it. Words don't get lighter when you repeat them. They get truer. On Tuesday, I waited until the morning rush leveled into its quiet hum. The manager was restocking lids, her mouth set in its usual line that meant she was thinking 3 problems ahead. "Do you have 60 seconds?" I asked. "She says while preparing to ruin my day," she said, smiling. "I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice." She leaned against the counter and studied me, her eyes a kind of X-ray that looked for fracture and found a knit instead. "About time," she said. "You'll train the new kid, you'll leave your apron here, you'll come back for coffee and tell me when the fancy people forget to pay you." "I will," I said, something unspooled in my chest, relief braided with gratitude. She hugged me over the counter, awkward and perfect. "Don't prove me wrong," she said into my hair. The goodbye lived over 14 days. I trained the new kid, college sophomore, too much gel, good heart. I wrote a list of shortcuts on a note card and taped it to the grinder. I showed him how to fold tip money into a jar that doesn't look like you're begging. On my last day, Lena brought a box of pastries and wrote "Proud of you, R," on the lid in frosting. The regulars pretended they didn't notice it was my last shift until they did, and then they hugged me the way people hug someone who has done a small kindness during their hard mornings. That night, the apartment felt too quiet. I lined up my pencils again and stared at the brief. The project had layers, out-of-home posters, digital banners, a landing page that needed to feel like a hand extended. I built a schedule in blocks: design, revision, walk, eat, breathe, because a life without shifts needs structure or it dissolves. Midweek, the firm called a check-in. I presented the first round and held my breath. The room felt aligned, heads nodded, notes were precise, debate was about the work, not me. Then a new voice cut through the harmony, a senior stakeholder who'd missed earlier meetings. "I don't see it," he said. "It's fine, it doesn't sing." The old heat rose in my cheeks, a reflex from family dinners and school presentations. I swallowed it, then asked, "What does singing mean for you? Joy, urgency, trust?" He blinked, surprised into specificity. "Trust," he said. "People need to feel we won't waste their time." I stripped the concept to that word, trust, fewer tricks, more clarity. I softened the color palette and gave the typography room. I wrote a line the copywriter sharpened into something clean enough to stand on. "We're here to make your next step easier." When we showed it the next day, the senior stakeholder nodded once, approval disguised as economy. The team smiled with their eyes. I walked home feeling taller by a 1/4 inch. The next morning, I bought a cheap office chair and watched a video on how to assemble it. It wobbled anyway. The fern looked healthier than it had any right to. I answered emails with a tone I was learning to call professional, which is to say kind and clear and unwilling to bend where meaning broke. I sent my first retainer proposal and felt foolish for an hour, then braver the next. The client accepted with a "glad to have you." I walked to the park and sat on a bench just to let that sentence stretch out inside me. Not every day applauded. A vendor missed a deadline and my timeline slipped like a rug on a slick floor. I apologized for what wasn't mine, caught myself, and corrected it in the next breath. I hired a photographer for a half-day shoot, negotiated down a fee without guilt, and said thank you with the respect of someone who knows what creative hours cost. When the proofs came back, I chose restraint, images that looked like people you might actually know. On Sunday, I drove to Worcester. My father was in the driveway, the hood of the old Buick open like a yawn. He wiped his hands on a rag and nodded at me in the way of men who love through practical verbs. "Coffee?" he asked. We sat at the kitchen table. The clock ticked the way it has always ticked, as if time were a job. He cleared his throat. "Your mother says you quit the coffee shop." "I did. HM." He stared into his mug like it might confess the future. "You doing okay money-wise?" "I am," I said. "It's not steady like a salary, but it's mine." He nodded slowly, as if translating between languages. "I fixed the draft in the porch window," he said. Thought you'd want to sit out there if you come early. The sentence held entire winters and a dozen unspoken apologies. I let it sit. Thank you, I said. We talked about spark plugs and why the Patriots would break his heart again this year. When I left, he walked me to the car and tapped the roof twice, an old habit that feels like a blessing even if he doesn't believe in blessings. Back in Boston, the rollout entered its final lap. The firm booked a small launch event, string lights, rented bar, a playlist someone agonized over. I wore a black dress that had survived 3 moving boxes and a haircut that made my neck feel like it belonged to a woman with plans. The room filled with the pleasant noise of people who know they are in a room that will matter to them later. They unveiled the campaign on a screen. My work, 15 feet tall, lines I had argued for, colors I had defended, a message we had boiled until it was clear. People clapped. The client shook my hand and said, "It feels like us." The copywriter bumped my shoulder, a new ritual, and whispered, "It sings." I stepped outside for air. The night was cool and the city generous with its lights. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and thought of the first $50, the torn grocery bag, the power outage, the manager's granola bar. I thought of my mother's text, "Eat something," and my father's question, "Health insurance," and how love sometimes arrives disguised as a budget meeting. My phone buzzed. A photo from my mother, the bakery frame on their mantel, flanked by 2 small plants I didn't know they owned. "Proud of you," she wrote. The period looked like a dot she'd placed with intention. On the walk home, I passed the café. The lights were low, chairs upturned. The new kid mopped with the earnestness of someone at the beginning of a life he hasn't guessed at yet. I pressed my palm to the glass and left a brief print the mop would erase. Good. Rooms should belong to the people inside them. At the apartment, I took down the sticky note and wrote a new one. Work that belongs to me requires rest that belongs to me. I shut the laptop at 10, not midnight. I set an alarm for a walk, not a meeting. The chair still wobbled. I put a folded postcard under one leg and called it engineering. In the middle of the night, I woke with the old panic that I'd forgotten something, that a teacher would collect an assignment I hadn't known existed. I sat up, breathing the way the internet teaches you to breathe. In, hold, out. The room stayed. The fear receded, not as a retreat but as an understanding. I wasn't a student waiting for permission anymore. I was a woman paying her own tuition in attention. Morning came with small gifts, sun in a slice across the desk, an email from a nonprofit asking if I'd speak to a group of young designers, the fern lifting as if stretching. I said yes to the talk, then wrote an outline that began with a sentence I still wasn't used to claiming. Here is what I know. Before I started the day's work, I called the café. The manager answered, voice already moving. "Miss me," she said. "Every morning," I said. "Thank you for the shove." "Any time," she said. "And Rachel." She waited a beat. "Don't forget to send me pictures when your stuff goes up on a bus. I want to point and brag at strangers." "I will," I said, smiling. "I promise." I hung up, opened the file for the next phase, and felt it. A quiet, durable certainty. Not triumph, not the cinematic swell. Just the click of a life sliding into a track it had been meant for all along. The bus rolled past my block wearing my work like a coat. A swath of color I'd argued for. A line of copy we'd pared to bone. I stood on the curb with coffee cooling in my hand and watched it idle at the light as if pausing to be introduced. A man on the corner glanced up, read the headline, and nodded to no one. It is a peculiar thing to see your thoughts scaled until strangers can lean on them. The photo I sent the cafe manager came back with 3 exclamation points and a demand for more angles. Lena texted a thumbs-up made of flour-dusted hands. The firm dropped a nice placement into the Slack like confetti. I took a breath that reached places I'd been short-changing and opened my laptop. By noon, I was on a Zoom with the nonprofit about the talk for young designers. "Tell them something real," the program lead said. "Everyone promises shortcuts. Maybe give them a map instead." I jotted that down. I've learned that the right sentence can be a streetlight for months. In the afternoon, a new email, a regional healthcare network, nothing glamorous, everything necessary, asking whether I could consult on a patient-facing campaign. The budget was careful. The timeline wasn't kind. Still, I said yes. Some work you do for your rent, some you do for your conscience, and some, if you're lucky, does both. By evening, the apartment had the warm disorder of a life in motion. Mock-ups fanned across the desk. The wobbly chair kept its bargain with the postcard. The fern lifted its fronds like a chorus humming under the melody. I closed the screen at 10, kept the promise on my sticky note, and let the quiet do its work. 2 days later, the healthcare team gathered in a windowless room that tried to be kind with a bowl of peppermint candies. A nurse with tired eyes said, "Families don't read paragraphs. Can we say it like we'd say it in the hallway?" I thought of my mother in a waiting room, clutching a purse full of tissues and worries. I thought of my father translating fear into questions about deductibles. "We can," I said. We took the weight out of the sentences and left the meaning. When we presented the drafts, the nurse exhaled the way relieved people do. "That," she said, "that sounds like us." On the train home, my phone buzzed. A photo from my mother, my bus, my work, rounding the rotary near their neighborhood. My father's hand was in the bottom edge of the frame, pointing. Beneath it, a text. We saw it. Then, a second. "Your father made the driver mad waving." I laughed out loud, and the woman across from me smiled as if she knew. For the first time, his pride did not arrive wrapped in a warning. The talk for the nonprofit fell on a rainy Saturday. 15 faces in a classroom that smelled like dry erase marker and earnestness. Some were 20, some were 40, all of us young in the ways that matter. I told them about the cracked laptop and the bakery logo, and the night the power went out just when I thought I'd run out. I told them about charging for revisions and keeping a calendar that protects your sanity like it's a client. I told them the thing the manager at the café taught me. Be one person who does two things until you can be one person who does one thing well. During the Q&A, a student in a red hoodie raised her hand. "How do you know when you're ready to leave the safe thing?" she asked, the word safe bending under its own weight. "You don't," I said. "You decide, and then you build scaffolding under that decision, one small plank at a time. Also ask for more than you think you're worth and deliver more than they expect. The math evens out." She nodded like she was pocketing a tool. When I got home, a voicemail waited. My father, his voice steadier than last time. "Saw the bus again," he said. "Your mother says it's stalking us." A beat. "You free tomorrow? Need a second pair of hands for the porch light. It's wired stupid." Translation, "Come over. I want you here. Bring what you know." I arrived with coffee and a screwdriver that was more symbolism than help. He had the ladder already out, the bulb already chosen, the switch played off and sitting like a patient. We worked in an old rhythm, he directing softly, me handing over tools, our hands finding the same screw at the same time. When the bulb finally glowed, he stepped down and looked at it as if it were proof. "Better," he said. He wiped his hands, then surprised himself. "You look good." "So do you," I said, which was not true in the ways men measure themselves, but was true in the way he'd begun to meet me in the middle of the room without his old armor. In the kitchen, my mother sliced a lemon cake with reverence. We ate at the table because that is where Andersons make sense of things. Between bites, my father cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, which in our family is the preface to either bad news or a shift. "When you were a kid, I told you dreams don't pay the bills." He stared at his plate. I should have said, "Some dreams do if you treat them like work." The sentence landed like a small boat docking after years at sea. I nodded. I treated yours like a law, I said. I'm trying to treat mine like a practice. He half smiled. Practice I can respect. He lifted his mug. Bring me a bus schedule. I'll find your poster like it's Fenway in 04. On the drive back, Massachusetts wore that late spring optimism where even the potholes seem forgivable. I rolled down the window and let the air tangle my hair. At a stoplight, the bus pulled alongside, my bus, and an older woman reached for the pull cord just as her gaze fell on the headline. She nodded, small and definite, and tugged. I didn't know what she was deciding, only that the words had touched the right place. That was enough. Monday began with a thud. One of the healthcare approvals got snarled in legal language so dense it felt like a forest. The project lead apologized and asked if we could redo 3 layouts by noon. The old me would have erased sleep to obey. The newer me said, "We can make the changes, but we need 24 hours to do them well. If we rush, you won't trust it." A pause on the other end. Then, "You're right, thank you." Boundaries held. The work was better for it. I ate lunch at my desk like a person who believes in afternoons. I answered a note from the red hoodie student. She'd asked for a portfolio review and I said yes with guardrails. When I returned to the file, I felt less like I was racing and more like I was arranging furniture in a room that already knew its purpose. Late that week, the firm's account lead forwarded an email from the tech startup, the one with the wide eyes. "We want to renew. Bigger scope. Retainer preferred." I read it twice, then sent a proposal with numbers that had frightened me a month ago. They accepted without haggling. I sat very still and let the future redraw itself again, quieter this time, like a tide moving in without the need to announce. That night I walked home the long way. The city hummed its usual hymn of breaks and laughter and a saxophone 3 blocks over. I passed the café, lights warm, the new kid flipping chairs. He caught sight of me and lifted a hand, a grin like a lit match. I waved back and kept going. In the apartment, I took down the sticky note with the reminder about rest and wrote another underneath it. Trust is the design. Start there. I watered the fern and it returned the favor by staying alive. I called my mother to ask about a recipe I had no intention of making just to hear the sound her voice makes when she teaches. I texted my father a picture of the bus schedule. He replied with game on. Before sleep, I opened the notebook to the first page again, the one that used to be blank. The sentences of the last month stacked there like bricks, irregular but holding. I added one more, not as an ending but as a marker. They laughed when I left with nothing. Today I left the office with keys. The email subject line wore no drama, opportunity to pitch. Inside, it was bigger than the font allowed, citywide transit refresh, multiple partners, 6-month scope. I read it twice, then checked the sender 3 times, the way you test a railing before you lean. The firm wanted me to lead the visual pitch. "We'll build around you," the account lead wrote again, as if the first time had been rehearsal. That morning, the bus with my campaign slid by my block and I waved back like an idiot. It felt less like vanity and more like superstition. Touch what brought you here. By noon, the conference room was a storm of boards and tape and coffee that had surrendered. The copywriter pinned a phrase that sounded like a bell. The strategist drew arrows only she understood. I sketched at a pace that split the difference between urgency and care. Trust as spine, clarity as skin, color as pulse. At 3, my phone buzzed with a photo from Lena, the bakery window, now carrying a small sign designed by Rachel Anderson. Below it, a caption, "Neighborhood needs to know its own." I smiled at the generosity disguised as advertising and returned to the boards. We were an hour from calling it when the account lead's face changed. "Billboard misprint," she said, reading from her phone. "Kenmore Square, wrong URL, live since 10 a.m. The room shifted its weight. A mistake at that scale feels like a siren even when you keep your voice down. Old reflex, panic, apology, sprint. New practice, breathe, ask, solve. Who owns the placement? I said, media, buy, or vendor. She pointed. I called the vendor, asked for the night manager, skipped the blame, led with consequence. It undermines trust, I said, the word working like a key. He promised a proof within the hour, a fix by dawn. We drafted a short post for the client's channels that didn't point fingers and did right by users who had clicked a dead link. I walked to the bathroom and let my hands shake there instead of on the work. When I came back, the copywriter slid a pack of almonds toward me. Emergency dinner, she said. I laughed and ate every last one like a person who believes in afternoons. We locked the pitch at 7. On the train home, the city blurred into a kind of kind noise. I closed my eyes and saw the board again, the line work, the places where we'd left air. When I opened them, my mother had texted a photo of a shoebox on our kitchen table. On top, school drawings, a crooked sun, a family of stick figures holding hands. Found these in the closet. Bring them home. I typed yes before I knew why I was crying. The next day, the transit authority meeting happened in a room that smelled like municipal carpet and caution. 6 faces, each carrying a different piece of the worry. A woman with a braid like a rope said, "People don't want clever, they want to get where they're going." I nodded. Then that's our north. Clean wayfinding, honest tone, respect for attention. I showed 3 paths, one safe, one brave, one that looked like Boston on a good day. We don't need to shout, I said. We need to be undeniable. They didn't clap. Good rooms almost never do, but someone drew a check mark next to the brave one, and the man at the end of the table, the one who'd been frowning like it was his job, stopped. At lunch, I walked to the public garden and let the pond remind me that movement doesn't have to splash. I called my father without bracing. He picked up on the second ring. "How's the buses?" he asked, plural as if I now owned a fleet. "Possibly more of them," I said. "Pitch went well." "HM," a proud sound wrapped in caution, then shaved down. "Good," he said. "Proud." The word arrived without accompaniment, and I held it like a warm coin. When I got back to the office, the vendor had sent the billboard proof with the corrected URL. The image looked right again, trust restored with one letter in its proper place. I sent it to the client with a note that owned the error and the fix. They replied with what I now understood as true relief. "Thanks for handling. It is its own kind of success to be the person people calm down around." That evening, the nonprofit sent a photo from the talk. A circle of students bent over their work, a red hoodie in the front row, her face set in the way of people who have decided. Beneath it, "Your map helped." I forwarded it to the café manager with nothing but a heart. She responded, "Charge for maps." I laughed alone in my apartment long enough that the fern looked concerned. The weekend belonged to the healthcare campaign. Legal had returned the copy with more red than white, and we were threading needles while the patient waited. I asked the nurse with the tired eyes if she could read the line out loud the way she would in a hallway. She did, and we rebuilt it around her breath. When we presented Monday, the room unclenched by measurable degrees. "There," she said. "That's how we say it when we care." On Wednesday, my parents invited me to dinner, just the 3 of us, no holiday to blame. I brought flowers that looked like effort and a box with a new frame. My mother had made chicken the way she did when report cards were good. On the counter sat the shoebox. After we ate, my father lifted out a drawing of a house with a door too big. "You always made the doors big," he said. "I thought it was because you didn't know scale." "I think I wanted everyone to fit," I said. He nodded at that, a man cataloging the ways a child explains herself without words. He pulled another page, me small, on a tall ladder reaching toward a sky full of rectangles. He frowned. "What's this one supposed to be?" "Billboards," I said, laughing. I didn't know the word then. "Well," he said deadpan, the way only fathers get away with, "you figured it out." We sat with the drawings in our laps like we were reading our family in translation. My mother touched the edge of the frame I'd brought, a print of the bus shot, reduced to fit a mantle. "We'll put it here," she said, pointing to the spot between the plants that had survived our years of not knowing how to talk. My father adjusted it by a quarter inch, and for once I let him because sometimes love is the right angle. On the drive back, I thought about doors, how often I'd stood on the wrong side waiting for an invitation I didn't need. The pitch deck was on the passenger seat, its corners soft from use. At a red light, I wrote a line on a receipt. "Design is a door with an honest doorknob." It was terrible and true, and I kept it anyway. Thursday came with an email, Transit Authority, next steps. My chest tightened the way a sky does before rain, not from fear but from electricity. They wanted to test both the Brave and the Boston on a Good Day directions in a few stations. "Let's see what people touch," the woman with the rope braid wrote. "Let's see where their hands go." That evening, I passed Kenmore and looked up at the corrected billboard. The URL sat there, certain of itself. Below, two teenagers argued about baseball with the absolute conviction of youth. A bus sighed and knelt for a woman with a cane. The city, in all its unglamorous choreography, kept getting people where they needed to go. I wanted to cry for no good reason and every good reason. Back at the apartment, I opened the notebook and read the first page again, then the last. The sentences had become a spine. I added one more, the kind you write when you are old enough to stop asking if you're allowed. "I am not chasing smoke. I am making signals." The first morning of the pilot, I stood at Government Center with a notebook and the kind of attention you offer a newborn. The Brave direction and the Boston on a Good Day direction shared the space like cousins at a reunion. Same family, different jokes. Commuters moved in the practiced choreography of need. I watched where eyes landed, where feet hesitated, where hands reached. A man in a construction vest traced the new line on the floor with his boot, then followed it to the right platform without looking up. A woman pushing a stroller paused under the overhead sign and smiled the way people do when something honors their time. An older couple argued quietly, then the woman tapped the Boston on a Good Day poster and said, "There," as if the wall had answered. I took notes without filming anyone, as if privacy were a tithe you paid to the public. "Trust is frictionless," I wrote. "Make it hard to get lost." The woman with the rope braid appeared at my elbow like a conjured ally. "We'll keep both," she said. "Different stations have different brains." I loved her for giving the city a mind. By noon, word came from Kenmore. Someone had peeled a corner of the Brave poster and scrawled "Why so serious" in permanent marker. Vandalism is its own kind of feedback. I took the green line there and found a kid with a skateboard watching his friend pretend not to be the culprit. The tag wasn't clever, but it wasn't cruel. I crouched and smoothed the wrinkled edge back with my palm, then stepped to the side and considered the wall like a patient. The copywriter joined me. "We could answer it," she said, half joking, half planning. "With a smile," I said. "With a mirror," she said. We mocked up a small, sanctioned sticker to sit under the vandal's question, "Because your time matters." The authority approved it in an hour. By evening, the sticker was in place, and teenagers were arguing about whether we'd planned the whole thing. We hadn't. The city had collaborated. Back at the apartment, I opened an email from accounting like a person opening a letter that could propose marriage or divorce. The retainer had landed. Numbers that used to look like foreign currency now read as hours, groceries, margin. I closed my eyes and let my shoulders lower another degree. When I opened them, the ferns seemed to be applauding. I registered an LLC the next day, a ritual of paper that felt like naming a child. Anderson's studio looked plain until I imagined it on an invoice and on the door of a space I didn't yet have. I booked time with a tax preparer because bravery dresses better with math. I made a list titled What Grown Businesses Do and added items as if I were climbing rungs. Contract templates, an accountant, templates for scopes that protect both sides. The nonprofit asked if I could mentor the red hoodie student. We met at the library under the tall windows. Her portfolio was raw and promising and full of the honesty of someone who hasn't learned to perform yet. "Everyone tells me to find a style," she said. "What if I don't have one?" "You do," I said. "It's just not loud yet. Follow your taste. Style is what happens when you tell the truth long enough." She nodded like relief had a sound. The tech startup sent over a feature request that would balloon the scope without ballooning the fee. The old me would have said yes and called it grit. The newer me wrote a clear email, happy to include this with an updated timeline and budget, or we can save it for phase 2. They chose phase 2 and thanked me. Boundaries don't bruise good clients, they shape them. On a Thursday, the transit authority called. "We want to move forward," the rope braid woman said. "Full program, you're brave," with a Boston smile. I sat down hard, the chair wobbling with me, both of us agreeing not to fall. "We'll need more hands," she added. "Can you scale?" 2 months ago, that word would have felt like a dare. Now, it sounded like an invitation to stop pretending I could be 10 people. I reached out to the copywriter, a developer I trusted, a photographer who knew how to catch a face in the half-second between guard and grace. We met at my apartment because the wobbly chair is a good judge of character. "I can't pay agency rates," I said. "I can pay fairly and on time, and I'll protect the work." They said yes. I made a Slack and for the first time typed #studio into a channel that actually belonged to me. We rented a tiny room over a print shop for the weeks we'd need to spread out, a narrow space with a window that looked at the back of another building and a light that made even bad days look harmless. I brought the fern. The developer brought seltzer. The copywriter brought a playlist that made the walls less tight. We wrote and erased and taped and tore and laughed in that exhausted way tired joy laughs. Midway through, a call from my mother. "Come to dinner whenever." No holiday. Her voice had the softened edges of practice. I brought salad and a map of the pilot stations. My father put on his readers and leaned over the paper like he was learning a language he respected. "They trust you," he said finally, and the sentence came out both observation and apology. "I'm trying to deserve it," I said. He nodded. "That's all any of us are doing." After dinner, he walked me to the car and without clearing his throat said, "I told your uncle I was wrong." It was the largest sentence he had ever carried in my direction. He didn't take it well. A hint of a smile. "Good." On Monday, we filmed riders for a short doc to live on the transit site. No actors, just faces, the music of real footsteps. The photographer shot a grandmother counting stops on her fingers, a nurse closing her eyes for 2 minutes of borrowed sleep, a teenager tracing the new line with a finger like it was a spell. We asked consent. We spelled names correctly. We paid for time because it matters. The day we delivered the full deck, I wore the thrift store navy blazer and didn't tug at the sleeves. The account lead clicked through the slides with the calm of someone steering in smooth water. When the last screen landed, the one with the line we had fought for, "We're here to make your next step easier," the room held that particular quiet of approval not wanting to admit itself. Then the rope braid woman smiled. "Let's get people where they're going," she said, without making them feel small. After we walked out into sunlight that had waited, the copywriter bumped my shoulder. "You looked like you belonged," she said. "I did," I said, surprised to hear it aloud and find it true. That evening, I stopped by the café with photos on my phone and a gift card the firm had given me. The manager eyed the card and snorted. "They trying to recruit me," she said. I showed her the bus shot. She whistled low. "That'll do." She wiped her hands on a towel and very seriously said, "I'm collecting bragging rights. Don't make me return them." I promised again to send pictures when the big pieces went up. The studio room over the print shop became a small country. We had rules: eat, stretch, ask, be kind in the margins. We had rituals: almonds at 5, a walk around the block when the pixel blindness set in, a scoreboard where we chalked small wins. I wrote rest is part of the work above the door and obeyed it twice out of 3 times. Progress. One night late, I answered an email from the healthcare team, another approval snag, this time about a word that made lawyers itch. We found a synonym that felt human and safe. The nurse wrote back, "Thank you for not making us sound like paperwork." I forwarded it to my father with the subject line, "We fixed a light." He wrote back, "Good wiring lasts." We were learning to speak. The next Saturday, my parents came into the city to see the test stations. My mother wore her good coat and carried mints the way you carry hope. My father read the signs out loud as if he were teaching them to behave. At a platform, a little girl in a purple hat reached up and traced the arrow to our line. "This way," she commanded her father. Mine watched the scene with the still face he uses for large feelings. When the train arrived, he cleared his throat like a man about to lift something. "You did this," he said. No caveats, no warnings, a period. On the way back to the car, we passed a bus with my headline. He took a photo without pretending he wasn't. "Fenway in 04, he said, and I wanted to hug the whole absurd city. That night alone, I didn't open my laptop. I made pasta and ate it at the small table by the window. The chair wobbled, I let it. The fern held its green secrets. I flipped through the shoebox drawings my mother had sent, doors too big, ladders to skies full of rectangles, and tucked one into a frame over the desk, a reminder that the child who drew billboards before she knew the word for them had not been wrong. She had been early. Before sleep, the notebook. The first page, the last, and a new line on the next. I left with nothing. Today I have a map, a team, and a city that lets me help it move. Autumn edged toward its old appointment, Thanksgiving, and the city put on its cedar and smoke cologne. The transit pilot had grown into muscle. Decals held, arrows led, the dock cut together into something honest. The studio's tiny room over the print shop smelled like coffee and markers and a future that had agreed to stay. My mother called one Tuesday evening and tried to sound casual. "We're doing Thanksgiving here," she said. "Small, your brother, Aunt May, if you can come." The if was a bridge. I crossed it. I baked cornbread because it was the one thing I could make without an argument. I brought flowers that looked like a warm conversation. The house felt as it always had. Hallway photos marching down the wall, the same clock clicking its metronome law. But the air had loosened, as if someone had opened a window in a room I didn't know was stale. My cousin, he of the smirk, arrived late, smelling like a cologne that had cost him a decision. He kissed my mother's cheek and nodded at me with the awkwardness of someone meeting an old version they'd misjudged. "Saw your bus," he said. Almost missed mine staring at it. His grin was an apology written in a dialect I understood. At the table, the ritual felt familiar. My aunt refolded napkins, my brother talked about interest rates, my mother's cranberry sauce made its annual attempt. Then my father lifted his glass, the movement small and unexpected. He is not a speech man. He is a fix-the-hinge man, but he cleared his throat and stood anyway. "I said something last Thanksgiving I shouldn't have," he began, eyes on the turkey, as if the bird required witness. "I said our daughter would come back with nothing. I was wrong." He glanced up, met my eyes, didn't look away. "She built something, with nothing anyone else could see but her. We are proud. Silence can bruise or bless. This one blessed." My mother's hand found his sleeve and stayed there. Across the table, my cousin nodded once, the small bow of a man taking off a hat indoors. Aunt May made a soft sound that might have been a prayer or a satisfied hum. I breathed, not like a person trying not to cry, but like someone who finally had the lungs for it. Plates passed. Stories loosened. My father, warmed by the rare weather of public tenderness, veered back into his country. And she charges for revisions, he said, with a smile that bragged like a bumper sticker. The table laughed, not at me, but the way families laugh when they recognize themselves surviving. After dinner, we migrated to the living room, where the mantel now held the bakery frame and a smaller one with my bus, the plants flanking them like proud grandparents. My cousin hovered there, hands in pockets. I told a client we should call you, he said, then scoffed at himself. Imagine that. Imagine, I said. He looked like a man trying to return a sentence he wished he'd never said. I let him. If you do, I added, we'll talk scope. He blinked. Scope. Boundary's older cousin, I said, the corner of his mouth lifted. Right, he said. Right. In the kitchen, my mother wrapped leftovers with a precision that belongs to women who have saved families one container at a time. She tucked an extra slice of pie into my bag when my father pretended not to see. For work, she said. Work needs pie. When it was time to go, my father walked me to the porch. The light we'd fixed weeks ago glowed with that patient honesty only good wiring knows. He tapped the banister with his knuckles like you might check a railing you yourself installed. You headed straight back, he asked. I'll stop by the studio, I said. Make sure the heat's set right. He nodded, then looked at me as if measuring a board for the final cut. You want help finding a real place? He asked. A lease, not above a printer. The offer arrived wrapped in the old wrapping practicality, but inside it sat a new gift, permission that didn't own me. I'll ask when I get there, I said. I promise. On the drive into the city, the radio found a song from 04 and my father's Fenway line came back like a hand on my shoulder. I parked near the shop and climbed the narrow stairs. The room was a map of our days, tape on the floor, the scoreboard smudged with chalk, the fern insisting with cheerful arrogance. I turned the heat down, checked the window latch, and for no reason other than the joy of it, spun in the wobbly chair and didn't fall. My phone buzzed. A photo from the rope braid woman, a crowd at Park Street moving like a school of fish following our lines without thinking. Under it she wrote, "It's working." I sent back a single word, "Good." Then, because I have learned to name the thing and not be shy in front of it, I added, "Proud." The next week, the lease found me. A ground floor space on a side street in the South End, once a tailor's, with a front window shaped like a sentence that invites you in. The rent was not kind, but it was fair. The ceilings were higher than we deserved and exactly what we needed. I brought my father to see it because some stories are better told in room tone. He walked the perimeter, pressed his palm to the wall like he could hear its history, crouched to eye the baseboards. She needs work, he said, and I couldn't tell if he meant the building or his daughter or the beautiful, honest truth of both. We'll paint, I said. We'll fix the wobble in the floor. We'll put the desk by the window. I pointed to a spot that already felt like a decision. He nodded. And the sign, he asked. Anderson's studio, I said, testing the weight of my own name on the street. Simple, clean, like it knows what it's doing. He grinned, crooked, rare, the kind he wore when something fit just right. We'll hang it straight, he said. We spent Saturday sanding and spackling, the copywriter stopping by with bagels, the developer bringing a toolbox that outshone mine by a century. We took turns with the roller. My father showed us how to cut into a corner like a professional. He stood in the doorway for a long time as the walls dried. Doors are big, he said, looking at the front. Good. That was the plan, I said. At dusk, we dragged the old desk from the apartment and set it beneath the window. I placed the fern like a flag. The light found us through the glass and made us look more certain than perhaps we were. It was enough. A little before closing, a woman in a red coat paused at the door, read the taped paper, opening soon, and peered in. What will you do here? She asked. Help people find their way, I said, surprising myself with the clarity. She nodded, as if that were as reasonable a business model as any. Good, she said. We need that. That night I walked home with paint on my forearms and the particular fatigue of work that ends in a room ready to begin. I passed the café. The new kid waved a towel like a flag. I passed a bus idling at the light and didn't need to read it to know what it said. In the apartment, I opened the notebook and wrote on the first page that still had margin. I left with nothing. I am returning with keys and a door big enough for the people I love to walk through without ducking. The studio opened on a Wednesday morning in early spring. The sign above the door, Anderson's Studio, hung straight, just as my father had promised. Sunlight filled the window, warming the fresh paint, touching the fern that had followed me through every chapter of this new life. People came in, curious first, then interested. A bakery owner wanting a fresh logo, a non-profit needing posters for a fundraiser, a young woman in a red hoodie, no longer a student but a designer ready to work beside me asking, "Where do I start?" I showed her the desk by the window. "Here," I said. "Begin here. That's all any of us ever do." That evening, after the last visitor left, I locked the door and leaned against the frame. The city hummed outside, trains carrying strangers home, buses wearing our colors as if they'd always been theirs. I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who walked away from Thanksgiving dinner with a suitcase and nothing else, and how wrong everyone had been, myself included, about what nothing meant. Because sometimes nothing is not emptiness, it's space. And space, if you dare to stay, becomes everything. Dear friends, thank you for staying with me through this journey. May your days be filled with health, may your homes be filled with peace, and may your families be blessed with love and understanding. And if this story touched you, I invite you to subscribe for more stories, more lessons, and more reminders that even from nothing, we can return with everything.